First of all, I'll just start off with some general points about how I make videos, what I do, sort of my philosophy behind everything, and some tips and pointers, because like Peter said, I know everyone is doing a bunch of things regarding video, whether you've done it before, whether you're planning to jump straight into it, and especially nowadays with this health crisis, things are quite strange and we need to adapt what we're doing basically. So I have sympathy there. For myself, I've been working with a lot of video related projects, but also I've been tying in things in person, whether they're performances or recordings or lectures. And so I understand the impact that everything being canceled has. So jumping straight into it, let me first talk about video and why I personally like video, because of course there are a lot of pros and cons to the video format as a musician. And first of all, video today with social media and the way that we share things, the way that we consume content, video is a huge part of it. But personally, I was attracted to video because it helps combine many different aspects of things that I love to deal with. Of course, music, the visual aspect of it, tying in photography, videography, and a little bit of graphic design as well. And I really like that you have a bit of control in terms of how you present, whether it's a lesson, a performance, whatever you have to share. You have the ability to personalize it depending on how you want to form your narrative for that particular video. Of course, there are pros and cons in terms of the editing aspect of it. It's something that I've personally struggled with because on one hand, you can always be yourself and be authentic. It's as simple as just not making up a separate persona just for the sake of the camera. But on the other hand, editing is always a big part of video making, right? So at the end of the day, your product will be sort of a modified version of your real self. And there's a trade-off there, because the reason why we do that is to polish up our product and also to get rid of unnecessary material. And we don't want to waste people's time when they click on your video. So the great thing about editing is that you can chop out the bits that you don't need. So that's the reason why I like video, and I just would like to start off by sharing that, just to maybe give you all some ideas in terms of why you might try to include more video into your work. Also, of course, a very important aspect of all of this is that it's scalable. So once you form a video, of course, it takes a lot of time. I'm going to talk about this more in a little bit in terms of the time-consuming nature of video making. But what you get in return is one piece of it's a file basically that you can share, post in different places, and other people can watch from all over the place. So that is, those are all the pros. Because we use platforms like YouTube, Facebook, I think also Vimeo. I've never tried Vimeo, but because of these various platforms have their own style of how videos are shared, why people go on to watch the videos and all of this, you always have to work around, okay, what type of video will work better on this platform? And also it's quite saturated with a lot of stuff. And it's not always the best, the quality control is not always the best in many of these circumstances. So that's just something that I view as a potential, just something that you deal with. I'm not going to put it in a positive or negative light, but that's just something that we all should keep in mind. And sometimes, honestly, it's a little frustrating because what garners a lot of attention versus what is really high quality doesn't always mix and match. So we don't, I personally believe that we shouldn't value the clicks and the views as much. It's an indicator of certain things that work, but I think those numbers should always be compared within your own trend of like how your videos perform. And I don't know if you all have already had experience posting videos. Maybe you can type in the chat box so I can just glance over who has posted videos before, whether it was just on Facebook for your friends and family, or who has a YouTube channel, who has a professional work-based Instagram. And I make that clarification because with Instagram, a lot of people have personal accounts, and I think it's best if you separate the two. YouTube, okay, that gives me a better idea. Okay, so I want to talk also about finding an audience. When making a video, I want to talk a lot about being authentic, and I know it sounds very, very, I don't know, cliche maybe, but I really believe in just staying true to yourself when making any kind of video, because in the long term, it'll really pay off. Maybe in the beginning, it won't be as effective as maybe if you follow the trends that are happening on YouTube, or follow the types of personalities that maybe attract more attention online. Because if you scan through the internet, there is a type of personality, a type of voice, a type of energy that people, respond to, maybe not better, but more, because maybe you're louder, maybe you're more just in your face. But if you just stick to your own personality, later on, you won't have to deal with any kind of dissonance between who you are and who you present in the form of your videos. So that is super important. And also the beauty of the internet is that you have access to reach so many people. In fact, anybody with internet. So amongst that massive pool of people, chances are there will be an audience that loves you for exactly who you are, what you do, and is there to support you for all of the ups and downs that you go through while presenting yourself and your material online. So, and it's, of course, it's at times an uncomfortable thing to do, because maybe say that you're not even going to post a video, just seeing yourself sometimes while you're editing is a little uncomfortable. So there are a lot of things that you have to get over and just re-examine consistently throughout this whole process. But again, authenticity is the key there. In terms of how I personally put together videos, it really depends on the format. So if you look across a lot of music YouTubers or just people that create videos in general, a lot of people have formats that they follow, maybe a particular style or maybe a particular organization to their videos. I personally have maybe 2 or 3 solid formats that I've been following that have been evolving over time, but they have been largely consistent. One is called the How to Sound Like X Composer series, where I break down the elements of a particular composer, and then I put back these different things together to create an arrangement of Happy Birthday, and I post this video around the composer's birthday. And this is a sort of a lecture style video where it's pretty matter of fact. I just show within the video, here are the different things that are involved in this composer style based on my interpretation of this music, and here's the final product. And the other format that I have is called X genre as digested by a classical musician. So for example, if I'm focusing on bossa nova, it'll be bossa nova as digested by a classical musician. And this one is a little different because it's more candid, and it's about documenting my personal exploration of a new genre, something that I have not previously been so exposed to. And I basically just grab footage throughout a period of time, and then I compile it all together and form a bit of a narrative in terms of presenting how my progress with this genre has been. And like the How to Sound Like series, at the end I usually present an original work of mine. So those two have been, of course, evolving in their own ways, but they've been consistent, but it's very different. So why I talk about formats is because having a format in mind will influence the way that one does their camera work and also compiles their footage. So one thing that I want to emphasize today is about file organization. It's so important. I wish someone would have told me in the very beginning, please learn how to organize your files and just prioritize that, because I cannot tell you how many times I've just lost so much time and energy because I couldn't find something, or I actually lost something because I didn't back it up. So what I do is I always make as many folders as possible, and then make notes of where I put these folders. So maybe in a separate document file or a notebook, I'll keep track of where these folders are, because sometimes in the moment we name a file, you know, March rehearsal, and then 3 months pass, and now March rehearsal makes you think of 7 different things. So just be smart about file organization. So going back to my How to Sound Like series versus As Digested By, the process of gathering this footage is extremely different, because one is almost premeditated, because once I have everything pretty organized in my head, I know exactly what examples I want to show, and the final product is very straightforward. It's just one take, overhead camera on the piano. And by the way, if you're curious about that, I have a video detailing how I do the overhead camera work. And because that's the format is straightforward, I basically have bullet points in terms of, okay, I need to film this and record this first, and I'll just continue down the list until I have everything. And then in the video editing software, I'll dump it in and I'll just start chopping. The As Digested By series is more candid, more like a documentation, as I said. So it's very difficult to keep things organized. And also sometimes these videos, the footage is compiled within about a week. Sometimes I've had a video that took more than 6 months. I did a video on flamenco, and that all the footage that I gathered was in the period of 6 months, which ends up being so much footage. And what I do for this type of project is I just remind myself, whenever possible, whenever I'm dealing with this genre and this project, I'll just turn on the camera. Sometimes it's not the best camera work. Sometimes it's with my phone, but as long as I have just a consistent archive of footage, I'm okay. And later on, I'll take all of this and dump it in the video editing software, stare at it basically for a week, because I don't understand how I'm going to edit this. And then somehow I start to see, okay, let me just examine how I progressed with this personally. And then I start to chop up what I think is completely unnecessary to show, and some parts where I think personally they're interesting. So that process, the second type of video, is very, it depends on each project, and it varies so much that I really don't have a strategy. So that's the importance of having a format. In terms of creating a format, I think that comes with experimentation. I didn't really have a format until about a year into making videos. Of course, the very first way that I started making videos was this, I don't know if you could call it a series, but it was this thing that I did called practice notes. And I basically numbered each video. I did practice notes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to maybe 60 or 70 something videos. And the organization of it was very simple. I just gathered little bits of my practicing throughout the day and included maybe 20 to 30-second clips of everything that I did, and just chopped it up together and formed a 3 to 4 minute long video. So in terms of providing any kind of concrete value to whoever watches it, that's a little questionable, because when I go back to the videos, I see just a random pile of, okay, I was practicing a little bit of Chopin, and then I learned about this chord progression, and then, oh, now I'm playing this exercise, but without any kind of narrative, any structure. But over time, it turned into something else, and then it started to focus more deeply on one subject. And then I think the How to Sound Like video emerged, and then after the other format emerged. So keep that in mind. Before jumping in, it might be very useful to have a format, because also say that you have a very formal video structure where maybe you're presenting a piece that you wrote, and it's just a performance-based thing, maybe with a bit of an introduction where you speak about the piece, the history of it, or maybe it's something you wrote, some little commentary, and then the performance. With that format in mind, maybe you will choose a more formal type of camera work as well. Maybe not the vlog style camera work, because that format and that type of presentation really calls for a specific type of camera work. Again, this is all just general suggestions and general ideas based on these different formats. If you do want to do something very creative and something feels right to you in terms of mixing a camera style with a format, then I would just go for it. So let's talk about equipment. When I first started, I had this pocket camera. It was a Sony RX100, something like that. And it was a model that was new about 5 or 6 years ago. Very powerful camera, but not as powerful as a camera where you can change out the lens. So when I give suggestions for equipment, a lot of times if you have an iPhone that is current within the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years, that's more than good enough to start with, especially if you're not using the front-facing camera. After the high-end phone cameras, I would suggest pocket cameras. A camera that is very popular on YouTube and for video makers in general is a Canon G7X. And these models, I think, are quite, I'm probably speaking of slightly outdated models, but if you just look at this line of cameras, maybe you'll find something that suits you. And the Sony competitor of that is the RX series. And then afterwards, you get into the DSLR or mirrorless cameras, and the range is quite high. You can start off with, $400 to $500 to thousands and thousands of dollars. In my opinion, if you're making videos for YouTube, you really don't have to go that high end. You can really find great gear, especially if you find used gear. 90% of everything that I buy in terms of camera gear, audio gear is always used. I also recognize that right now the mailing system is all out of whack. So if you are looking for gear, just keep that in mind. Just order something right away, because I've had friends and colleagues tell me that they're looking for a camera, they're looking for a recorder, but Amazon tells them that they can't ship until 2 months from now, that sort of thing. Okay, so DSLRs and mirrorless, why are they more capable and preferred over pocket cameras? It's because, again, the interchangeable lens. And this is sort of getting into the more fancier, personalized, and particular style of camera work. Depending on what lens you use, you can have different qualities of how the camera focuses on a subject, the quality of blur in the background, if any, and also the focus, how much of the scene is the camera capturing. So this is important, and I talk about this in my overhead filming video, because say that you're trying to capture all of the keys of the keyboard. You really need a wide lens to capture it all, because your standard iPhone will only go so far. Also though, if you really don't have the budget or the interest to upgrade from, say, a nice iPhone, especially if you have the recent iPhone, I think the video quality is just as good as an entry-level, just regular camera. You can buy an attachment to make it wider. So those are the cameras. A great guide for this is called DSLR Guide on YouTube. But I would really suggest, I was beginning to compile certain videos for different aspects of camera work for you all, but I really think the best way is to type in each of these different types of things. If you want to learn about interchangeable lenses or aperture or how to focus, the best thing is to type into YouTube how to, whatever it is, with your camera, because each camera has such different characteristics and all of that. So look up your camera specifically and check out several different videos recommended to you on YouTube. And then it'll only take 20-30 minutes and you'll understand this. Audio, let's talk about audio, because audio is so important. And personally, of the many shortcomings I've had in the videos in the past few years, it's always been audio. And I think naturally people have less tolerance for bad audio than bad video. And I personally feel the same way. If I'm watching a video that is very beautifully shot, perfect colors, perfect focus, everything, but the audio is just horrible, it's muffled, it's distorted, I'll click away. But on reverse, if the audio is great, I can hear the person clearly, I can hear the music, but the video is a little fuzzy or something is a little off, I'm less bothered by that. So audio, what I did for the first pretty much 3 years, because I only recently upgraded, was use a portable Zoom, a Zoom H5. And I've also used, just in passing, borrowing other people's equipment, a Zoom H6, a Zoom H2N, and any of those lines I think work great. And any of those portable recorders in general, I think there's some by Tascam that work really well as well. There are 2 ways to record, maybe more than that, but 2 ways that I'll focus on. One is to record directly onto your recording device, onto the SD card, separate from your video, and then merge the 2 in the software afterwards. And then the second version is to take a cable out of the outline of the audio recorder into the microphone input of your camera, so that you feed the audio directly into the video. This one, technically it's supposed to work perfect, but personally I've had so many issues with this because I would use the right cable, I would use the right input, everything, and it's something that I've also done before, but when I put the final footage back into the computer, I noticed there's a weird hum in the background, or I notice some sort of distortion somewhere. So it hasn't been consistent for me, and I haven't figured out exactly why. I just know that it's very unreliable. So I tend to prefer to keep it separate, and then I merge it in the software. Software, what software do I use? I use Final Cut Pro X. And I use it because when I first started, my brother had Final Cut on his computer, and he let me use the software, and it was just a no-brainer. I know that there are other software that people really love to use and that are very effective, like Adobe Premiere, Sony Vegas, and I also know some people that edit with apps. So on their iPhone or on their iPad or tablet, there are plenty of apps. Depending on what you want to do, certain apps are more than plenty, because if you just want to cut out the unnecessary bits of maybe you reaching over to the camera and turning it on and then walking out of frame, if you just want to cut that, you don't need a powerful editing software. That'll only confuse you. The reason why I like it is because I love to get really fancy with editing sometimes. I like to add in text. I find that adding in text is a great way to add more information into the frame on top of maybe what I'm speaking. And it just adds to the efficiency. And I personally love the graphics that surround, you know, fonts and colors and different designs. So I personally love that. This talk is too short to go straight into the details of video editing, but long story short, really start with the basics, learn how to cut out the unnecessary bits, and learn how to use your camera properly so that in the editing software, you don't have to manipulate too many things in terms of the image, because technically the software is there and it allows you to brighten an image or darken it. But if you really manage all of that within your camera first, you'll be better off than trying to fix it in the software. Okay. I would just summarize all of this technical information by saying that I think in terms of priority, take care of the audio, know how to use your camera. And this is not something I went so much into, but make sure you're lit properly. And this can be anything from making sure that all the lights are on or enough lamps are on around you, or you're nearby a window that gives you natural light. But I think the lighting aspect can be very easily fixed in many practical ways, but it's not always remembered, especially by me. I have plenty of videos from way back where I look at it and everything looks so dark. So with that being said, maybe I will open it up to questions before I talk a little bit about Patreon. By the way, Peter, did anyone press the space bar to chime in and I just totally rolled over that? Okay.
No, you haven't talked over anybody at all. People have put a couple things in the comments, but you've already addressed those. But if you have a question, go ahead and tap your space bar and chime in.
Okay. So here's one. If you're recording audio and video separately, how do you organize your filing system so you can put it together later? A basic numbering system. When I'm actually gathering the footage, I use simple, I have one here, Post-its, and I'll just say take one, and I'll look at the zoom, and maybe I'm on zoom 80. So I'll just say take one is connected to zoom 80. And then I'll just keep taking notes that way. And then later on, once I have all of my footage, I'll dump it into a file where I have the video from that day and then the audio from that day. And if I'm feeling extra organized, I would relabel everything so that everything fits together right then and there. Usually I just wait until I have to edit the actual video. So yeah, that's pretty much how I do it. When making videos about music, how do you handle the balance of publishing polished content and that which shows the process of practice and improvement? That's a great question. So depending on the type of video that you're making, sometimes you can deliberately add in a segment where this is designated for just showing the background process of how I prepared for the final product. And if you make that clear, then all of a sudden you have this pre-organized space where you can do whatever. You can really just show everything that happened, or just really clumsy bits of work, which I think is always interesting, because that's the part that we all can relate to, and it's so real. And also it's best not to take ourselves too seriously, I think. Of course, that's what we're asked of as musicians, highest level of standard and all of that, perfection. And that's great. There's a time and place for that, of course. And that's why we practice and work so hard. But also just showing that side of us, of our process, is, I think, great. So pre-designated spots, or have a complete separate video for that. And the theme of the actual video is the process leading up to everything. Do I use Logic Pro X for audio? I do use Logic, but honestly, most of the projects that I do have just involved my H5. And so I actually don't feed it into Logic, and I just do everything in Final Cut. I did mention that I upgraded very recently, and that is, I think it's more for specific projects. I don't intend to use this setup for all my videos that I do on YouTube, but I did get an interface and microphones to record whatever instrument I'm playing with higher quality. And when I do that, of course, I'll use Logic Pro. Let me see. I have a question about how many cameras and setup for me as a pianist and singer. Would I use an iPhone overhead for my hands and a second camera wide shot for my singing? I'm looking to record more formal performances of classical songs and cross-genre works. So really cool. I'm excited for you. And that's great. You're both a pianist and singer. A lot of respect for that. Well, if you're not going to record it at the same time, why not always use your camera? If you are recording at the same time, that would require two angles. But correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm understanding is that, oh, I see. No, you're probably playing the piano and singing at the same time, yes? Yes, okay. I would personally, yeah, I would play around with both. You might find that using the camera for your hands overhead might be better. Or maybe you don't want an overhead shot. Maybe you just want a closer shot of your hands from maybe the opposite side. But I would experiment with both. What's the relationship between your working life as a musician and your working life as a creator of videos? Do you mostly do live performances and fit videos around that? Is it the opposite? Do they feed into each other somehow? Do you find there's enough time to do both? Oh, that's a great question. So prior to 2019, I was performing and recording a lot more, and just playing in general a lot more than doing videos. And I would just make sure that I was semi-consistent with videos along the way. What happened in 2019 though was around the spring, I found that it was quite unmanageable. At the time, I just started working with PBS in co-hosting their the music channel called Soundfield. And it was a pretty rigorous schedule and very consistent and set timeline for the videos. And plus I was doing my videos for my channel, and I was traveling around trying to do all these types of gigs. And there's a particular, just I think month where I felt so uncomfortable on stage that I decided that it's probably best if I choose one or just focus on one thing over the other. And so 2019 for me was really about videos. And I always found that very difficult to balance because I didn't set out to become a video creator, honestly. And I still stand by that. I just was curious and accepting of an opportunity for myself and just to try this type of work. 2020 for me was set up to go back on stage, and I had first this season prepared for lecture type performances or just lectures in general, and then performances. But so far, you know, that hasn't panned out for obvious reasons. But yeah, the balance is tough. I just learned to, with videos, have a very loose schedule. I'm not trying to compare myself or catch up with other video creators who they're all into the videos, which is why if you follow my channel, you'll notice that sometimes I'll post one video and then wait 2 months and then post another one. And sometimes I'll post 2 in a month. It's not very consistent there. Okay. What do you think of Zoom H4n Pro? I think that's a great tool, a great little device. I also realized that when I talk and play, the microphone needs different levels. So I ended up recording those separately and then combining in final video. How are you handling this? That is a great question. Yes, so this has been a constant struggle of mine. I've done so many different things to try and navigate this issue. So basically, when you're talking and playing at the same time, depending on where you put the camera or the audio device, sometimes your talking will be way too loud and you can't hear the piano, or vice versa. What I find works pretty consistently is that when I have the camera overhead with a directional mic, so I have, what is it called? This is a Rode Video Micro microphone, which connects directly to the camera. It's a directional mic, meaning that it won't, you need to be in front of it for it to capture your audio. So the sound that it gets from the piano is not the best because it's literally just capturing what you hear right in front of you instead of from behind. But I find that usually the levels are okay in terms of it capturing both. Otherwise, with the Zoom H5, if you have access to a separate microphone, I would attach it to the Zoom, have the microphone towards the back or wherever you want it by the piano, and then have the Zoom actual mics closer to you. Or if you have 2 microphones, have 2 separate ones and then adjust the levels. But yeah, that's a very difficult thing. Let's see. When you began producing these videos, did you have a target audience? How has your audience developed and grown over the time you've been doing these? Have you done any work to grow your audience? Okay, so that's a great question, and maybe that's a good segue to talk a little bit about Patreon. When I started making videos, absolutely not. I did not have a target audience. Like any other musician who, you know, just finished school or is in school, of course, our goal is to find an audience in general. But did I start videos to find an audience? No, it was really not that way. I probably would have done different things if that had been the case. I think in terms of audience development, going back to what I said about there's just so many people out there, right? And whatever you make, you'll find a set of people that like that for what it is and like your personality and believe in what you do, all of that, just naturally. So I don't think it's a matter of trying to fit yourself to a specific type of audience, but being consistent in terms of putting your work out there so that you have better chance of these people that already exist out there that are interested in what you do or might be interested in your projects to chime in. I think that's the best strategy. I'm personally not the best at giving advice about how to grow your channel in terms of using different techniques, following the algorithm. I do understand a little bit about how the algorithm changes and what, you know, how clicks are generated and all of that, but it's really hard to follow, honestly, and it keeps changing. And going back to maybe one of the questions about how do you balance video making versus the music part, for now, and I feel privileged to say this, I can afford to just focus on the music and do my best in terms of what I'm doing with video instead of just putting all my eggs in the basket for video. And if that's something that you want to do, I think there are plenty of resources out there online in terms of understanding, you know, what types of thumbnails work better, what types of titles work better, all of that. And I will make a note on this subject that I think it's best to differentiate why you're making videos. For me, and I think for a lot of musicians, making videos is great because it becomes a personal archive. It's a way that we preserve what we've been doing and have it so that people just curious about what we do artistically, musically, can drop in and check what we're doing, and we can share what we're doing to our community and all of that. And it's just, it's there to serve as sort of our little personal gallery, our personal bulletin board. And it's a little different than jumping into the video sphere to become a YouTuber. And I've had many debates with friends of mine about this differentiation, but I really do feel this way. And not everyone has to agree with me, but I do feel like right now, those two are quite divided. There are definitely a lot of pros to go into the video sphere as a full-time, just all-out YouTuber. But sometimes what you need to do in order to succeed as a YouTuber will not align with what you want to do artistically. And that's just the nature of how the internet works, in my opinion. So that's just something that I keep in mind and will just point out. Related to all this and the audience, I've started a Patreon back in June of last year. And I think that I've done a lot of experimentation to fine tune what I do within Patreon, but just staying true to the type of content that I show on YouTube or other platforms. Staying true to that has really helped me find people that support me for who I am and nothing more than that, because I haven't built my audience by making videos that really were not me and were something else. And so in the Patreon sphere, I create additional videos. So every week I have a video. Sometimes it's related to piano technique. Sometimes it's about music harmony. Sometimes I'll analyze something or review someone's work. The content really varies, but it's consistent and there's less editing. So it's not all this fancy type of graphics and everything. Not that my videos are super fancy, but you know what I mean. It's relatively speaking, it's not that highly produced. But I do think that in some way and in some capacity, I'm adding certain valuable information for people to take. And there is a reason why they're subscribed to me on there, because I really do believe that for platforms like Patreon, which I think many of you know, you all are familiar with it, but if you're not, it's basically a platform where, depending on your setup, everyone uses it in a slightly different way, but people will subscribe to you and give you a tip or a donation every month. And in exchange, you provide them with some perks. And some people, sorry, I thought this disconnected. Some people use it to full capacity. Some people do not offer anything, but I'm of the camp that I believe that there should be a give and take. So I hope that gives you a little more idea of Patreon. You can ask me specific questions in the comments or unmute yourself. Let me go to the next question. Oh, I missed a lot here. Okay. I have a question about music licensing for online videos. I'm not sure about music licensing. I've only had experience with that through PBS. Sometimes we had to buy the rights to use a certain song or a certain portion of a song, but I've personally never done that myself. And a lot of the content that I create does not involve other music. I've had some genre videos where I have included little clips, but as long as they're short, sometimes you can just get away with it. Or I've had plenty of genre videos that were demonetized because they included a little clip. So yeah, I mean, but in terms of music licensing, I'm not so sure about that. Do you feel that if a piano is not in top shape, that a good keyboard is preferred for the listener? Oh, that's a good question. I think using your best judgment, if you have two to compare against, I think sometimes for sure a good keyboard will be preferred over a piano, because a lot of times the quality of having an acoustic instrument in front of you is much better felt live. If I'm listening to a pianist live, I would much rather hear them play a sort of out of shape, out of tune, real piano than a keyboard. But in the video sphere, maybe not. I was wondering less about the algorithms and more about the content you chose to produce. Okay. If you have a follow-up question about that, let me know. I used to post videos on YouTube and Facebook many years ago, but gave up because of the background music licensing issues. I've been waiting for the process to become more seamless. But even just this morning, Angela Hewitt had to go through hoops to get Facebook to release her morning performance of a Cool Out piece that was claimed by Long Long. What are your experiences with music releases online of work other than your own compositions? Oh, this is a very interesting question. Oddly enough, for the past 3 years, I would say 90% of the music that maybe even more, that I've included in my videos have been original works. So I don't have very much experience with playing other pre-existing compositions. Aside from one where I played an entire Bach prelude and fugue, and YouTube demonetized it and blocked it because they said it was someone else's recording. So I think that happens a lot. There are a lot of issues with the algorithm and the software that YouTube has to catch these tracks. And there are a lot of issues with this. And yeah, the only thing I can say is that I think it's getting better slightly because so many people are complaining about it, and there's a way to dispute it. So in a ridiculous case, such as, you played a Beethoven sonata, but the computer or YouTube is telling you that it's actually played by, Jonathan Biss. And you can dispute that and say, no, actually, please look at this manually. This is not the case. let's see, more, can you tell us a little more about the platform Patreon? I'm not sure if this was posted before I started talking about Patreon. If you do have a more specific question about it, please put it down below. As a programmer, do you find a difference between recent music and new music? Recent music and new music. Yes, I mean, depending on why I'm programming a piece of music, maybe sometimes I will choose a piece of music because it's really going to be a premiere, or I feel that not as many people know about it, and maybe I'll weigh different pieces based on how familiar other people are about it already, even if both of them are of today's time. I don't know if that answers the question, but I'll just move on for now. What keyboard do you recommend? Depends on it depends on what you're gonna do. It really depends. If you're planning to play classical music, I would go towards digital pianos, the clavinova type, because for many reasons. I find that the touch is a lot better, but also the sturdiness of the actual instrument really makes a difference. And this, I don't think, is often talked about. With a lot of keyboards, yes, you can find a really robust stand, but there's some repertoire just requires so much force, physical force, that it's really difficult to use a keyboard on a stand, if you know what I mean. What is the distinction between your Patreon content and your YouTube content? How do you evaluate the quality of what you're producing for each platform? A lot of times the general subject matter is very similar. The only distinction is that I will produce the video in a different way, because Patreon, it's really about the information itself. So maybe I will just shoot the video in a much more straightforward way, and maybe it'll focus on a more specific type of subject matter. Maybe it'll be super niche, like I'll talk about one specific piece, which is totally appropriate for YouTube, but sometimes, especially with my pre-existing formats, it doesn't work quite as well for the types of videos I put on YouTube. So I'll just decide to put it on Patreon. And a lot of the content comes from people asking about a specific video, a specific subject. So I'm responding to requests. Right, I'll just answer one more question here. Recent music is just something written recently, but clearly similar to things we have heard before. New music would be something which is unique and not like something you have heard before. Great answer, great follow-up to that. It wasn't a question, but I think we're done with questions here. Again, I apologize about the disappearance of my face, but I think you have seen enough of me anyway. Peter, I'll leave it up to you if we should wrap it up now.
Absolutely,
just leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Nahre. This is, I've learned a lot, and it's been really, really great. I've seen a lot of smiling faces and a lot of nodding heads. So I think you were right on target with everything.